On the morning of January 23, 1867, Dr. Edmund Harrow was summoned to examine a patient at St. Michael's Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. The patient was a boy of 13, named Timothy Caldwell, who had been admitted 3 days prior in a state described by the intake physician as grave and peculiar. The boy had arrived at the hospital carried by his father, a shipwright named Joseph Caldwell, who claimed that his son had not eaten or drunk anything in 42 days, and yet remained alive. Dr. Harrow, chief of medicine at St. Michael's and a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Medical College, approached such claims with appropriate skepticism. Medical literature contained numerous accounts of so-called fasting girls and other individuals who purported to survive without nourishment for extended periods. All such cases, upon investigation, had proven to be frauds instances of concealed feeding, exaggeration of timelines, or simple delusion on the part of observers. Dr. Harrow expected to find the Caldwell case no different. What he discovered instead would occupy him for the next 7 months, and would culminate in events that no one present could have anticipated. Timothy Caldwell was a thin boy with dark hair and unusually large eyes. He lay in his hospital bed perfectly still, his hands folded atop the blanket, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. When Dr. Harrow addressed him, the boy responded politely but without affect. Yes, he confirmed. He had not eaten in 42 days. No, he did not feel hunger. No, he did not feel thirst. He felt, he stated, empty but complete. Dr. Harrow conducted a physical examination. The boy's pulse was present, but weak, 40 beats per minute, far below normal. His respiration was shallow but regular. His skin was cool and dry. His tongue showed no signs of dehydration. His abdomen was concave but not distended. His muscle tone, while diminished, had not deteriorated to the degree one would expect from 6 weeks of starvation. The boy appeared malnourished but not moribund. He appeared to be dying, but dying very slowly, as if his body had achieved some impossible equilibrium between life and death. Dr. Harrow ordered that the boy be placed under continuous observation. A nurse was assigned to remain in the room at all times, with instructions to note any attempt at eating, drinking, or concealment of food. The boy's father was questioned extensively about the family's circumstances, Timothy's medical history, and the events leading to the present condition. Joseph Caldwell stated that his son had been a normal, healthy child until approximately 2 months prior. In late November of 1866, Timothy had fallen ill with what appeared to be a severe fever. A local physician had been consulted and had diagnosed pneumonia. The boy had been confined to bed, given standard treatments, poultices, tonics, enforced rest. The fever had broken after 5 days. But when Timothy recovered, he was changed. He had no appetite. Food, when placed before him, provoked revulsion. He would gag if forced to eat. He claimed that the sight and smell of food caused him physical pain. His father, believing this to be a lingering effect of the illness, had attempted various remedies, broths, bland foods, medicines to stimulate appetite. Nothing succeeded. Timothy grew thinner. His mother, alarmed, had consulted their parish priest. The priest, Father Michael Donovan of St. Ignatius Church, had visited the Caldwell home on multiple occasions. He had prayed with Timothy. He had blessed him with holy water. He had questioned whether the boy might be afflicted by spiritual rather than physical malady. Timothy had responded to these ministrations with the same flat politeness he showed everyone. He attended the prayers. He accepted the blessings. He stated that he felt God's presence, but that it did not change his condition. He could not eat. He would not eat. And yet, he did not die. By early January, Timothy had gone without food for more than a month. His parents, desperate and frightened, had brought him to St. Michael's Hospital, where Dr. Harrow now stood beside the boy's bed, writing observations in a leather-bound journal and trying to determine what natural explanation might account for what he was witnessing. Dr. Harrow established what he termed a regime of scientific observation. Timothy Caldwell would remain in an isolated room. The door would be locked from outside except when staff entered. All food and drink would be kept in a separate locked cabinet in the room, the key held by Dr. Harrow himself. The assigned nurse would maintain a written log of all activities, recording every 15 minutes whether the patient had moved, spoken, or shown any indication of distress. The boy's weight would be measured daily. His vital signs would be recorded 3 times per day. His urine and any other excretions would be collected and analyzed. If Timothy Caldwell was truly surviving without sustenance, medical science would document it. If he was not, if food was being smuggled, if the fast was being exaggerated, the deception would be exposed. The watch began on January 24th. For the first week, nothing unusual occurred. Timothy lay in bed, occasionally sitting up to look out the window, but otherwise remaining still. He spoke when addressed, but initiated no conversations. He accepted water when offered small sips, perhaps 2 ounces per day, but refused all food. His weight declined by 1 pound over 7 days, far less than would be expected from complete starvation. By the second week, word of the case had spread through the hospital. Other physicians requested permission to observe. Dr. Harrow, recognizing the potential significance of the case, granted access to 3 colleagues: Dr. William Ashford, a specialist in digestive ailments; Dr. Clarence Morton, who had studied cases of hysteria and nervous disorders; and Dr. Samuel Pierce, the hospital's chief surgeon. All 3 examined Timothy independently. All 3 confirmed Dr. Harrow's findings. The boy showed no signs of concealed feeding. His physical decline was present, but minimal. He remained impossibly alive. Father Donovan visited regularly, conducting bedside prayers and attempting to determine whether Timothy's condition might be supernatural in origin. The boy answered the priest's questions with the same careful courtesy he showed the doctors. No, he did not hear voices. No, he did not see visions. No, he had not been possessed by demons or visited by angels. He simply felt that eating was unnecessary, that his body had been changed, that he was being sustained by something other than food, though he could not name what that something was. "I am waiting," Timothy told Father Donovan during one visit. "I do not know for what, but I know that I am meant to wait." By the 4th week, Timothy's weight had stabilized. He had lost a total of 8 pounds since admission, significant, but not catastrophic. His pulse remained weak but steady. His mental faculties appeared unimpaired. He could read, converse, and answer questions with perfect clarity. He showed no signs of delirium or confusion. He was simply a boy who did not eat and did not die. The medical community began to take notice. Articles appeared in medical journals cautious, skeptical, but intrigued. Dr. Harrow published a preliminary report in the Baltimore Medical Quarterly, describing the case and inviting colleagues to propose explanations. Theories were offered: concealed feeding despite observation, consumption of non-food substances that somehow provided nutrition, a metabolic abnormality that allowed the body to survive on minimal intake. But none of these theories adequately explained what was being observed. And then, in the 7th week of observation, Timothy began to change in ways that could not be attributed to starvation alone. On March 11th, 1867, the attending nurse noted that Timothy's eyes had changed color. They had been brown. Now they appeared gray, with flecks of pale blue around the iris. The nurse initially attributed this to lighting conditions. The room faced east, and morning sun created strange effects. But when Dr. Harrow examined the boy later that day, he confirmed the observation. Timothy's eyes had lightened substantially. The boy himself seemed unsurprised. When asked about it, he stated that he had noticed a change several days prior, but had not thought to mention it. He felt no pain. His vision was unaffected. He simply looked different. Over the following week, additional changes became apparent. Timothy's hair, previously dark brown, began to show strands of silver white. His skin, already pale from confinement, took on an almost translucent quality, revealing fine networks of veins beneath. His fingernails, which should have been brittle from malnutrition, grew thick and opalescent. Most disturbing to the medical staff was a change in his scent. The boy no longer smelled human. He smelled, according to several nurses, like stone after rain, or like metal, or like nothing at all. Dr. Morton, the specialist in nervous disorders, proposed that these changes were psychosomatic manifestations of hysteria, producing physical symptoms through unknown mechanisms. Dr. Ashford suggested a disease of the blood or organs that was altering Timothy's appearance while somehow sustaining his life. Dr. Pierce argued for continued observation without theorizing, stating that they were witnessing something outside the bounds of known pathology. Father Donovan's interpretation was different. He believed Timothy was undergoing a spiritual transformation, that the boy's refusal of earthly food had opened him to divine sustenance, that he was becoming something other than human, not demonic. The priest was careful to emphasize, but perhaps angelic, or perhaps simply changed by proximity to the sacred. Father Donovan urged that Timothy be removed from medical observation and placed in the care of the church, where his condition could be interpreted through spiritual rather than scientific frameworks. Dr. Harrow refused. The boy remained in the hospital, under watch, while his transformation continued. By late March, Timothy weighed 73 pounds, down from 91 at admission. Yet his energy level had increased. He rose from bed regularly. He walked the perimeter of his room. He stood at the window for hours, watching the street below with an expression the nurses described as intent, as though he were searching for something. He began to speak differently. His sentences became more formal, almost archaic in construction. He referred to himself in the third person occasionally, then corrected himself. When Dr. Harrow asked why he did this, Timothy replied, "Because I forget, sometimes, that I'm still here, that I'm still Timothy. It becomes confusing." "What becomes confusing?" Dr. Harrow asked. "Where I end," the boy said, "and where the other thing begins." On April 2nd, a woman arrived at St. Michael's Hospital requesting to see Timothy Caldwell. She gave her name as Mrs. Abigail Marsh. She was approximately 60 years of age, dressed in black mourning clothes, and carried herself with the rigid composure of someone enduring great grief. She stated that she was not related to the boy, but that she had information relevant to his case. Dr. Harrow, intrigued, granted her an audience. Mrs. Marsh was escorted to his office, where she sat with her hands folded and began to speak in a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. She had, she stated, lost a son in 1853. His name had been Thomas Marsh. He had been 12 years old. In October of that year, Thomas had fallen ill with scarlet fever. The fever had persisted for 9 days. On the 9th day, Thomas had experienced convulsions and then fallen into unconsciousness. The doctor attending him had declared him dead. But Thomas was not dead. 6 hours after being pronounced deceased, as the family prepared his body for burial, the boy had drawn a breath. He had opened his eyes. He had sat up. The family, terrified and overjoyed, had called the doctor back. The doctor had examined Thomas and found him alive, but profoundly altered. Thomas would not eat. He claimed no hunger. He claimed no thirst. His parents had attempted to force food into him, fearing he would die of starvation. But Thomas had fought them with surprising strength. He had stated that eating would undo what had been done, that he was no longer the same, that something had entered him during his death and he must not disturb it. Mrs. Marsh described how her son had changed over the following weeks. His appearance had shifted, his eyes had lightened, his hair had silvered, his skin had become translucent. He had spoken strangely, referring to himself as the boy who was and the thing that is. He had stopped sleeping. He had stood at windows for hours, as though watching for someone or something. The local minister had been consulted. Prayers had been offered. The boy had accepted them politely, but stated they made no difference. He was beyond prayer, he said. He was being prepared. Prepared for what? Mrs. Marsh had asked her son. To leave, Thomas had replied. On November 14th, 1853, exactly 42 days after his resurrection, Thomas Marsh had walked out of his family's home in the middle of the night. Mrs. Marsh had found his bed empty at dawn. A search had been organized. The boy was found 3 miles from home, lying in a clearing in the woods. He was dead. His body was arranged as though sleeping, hands folded, eyes closed. But he had been dead for hours, the examining physician determined. He had died of no apparent cause. His body simply stopped. Mrs. Marsh had never spoken of these events publicly. Her husband had forbade it, fearing the family would be branded as liars, or worse. But her husband had died the previous year, and when she heard rumors of a boy in Baltimore who would not eat, who was changing in impossible ways, she had come forward. It is the same, she told Dr. Harrow. Whatever took my son is taking yours, and it will keep him for 42 days, and then it will be finished with him. Dr. Harrow thanked Mrs. Marsh for her testimony, recorded it in his journal, and escorted her from the hospital. He did not believe her story. He assumed it was grief-fueled fantasy, a mother's trauma creating patterns where none existed. But he counted the days, nonetheless. Timothy Caldwell had been admitted on January 20th. 42 days from that date would be March 3rd. But if one counted from when Timothy's father claimed the fast had begun late November, then 42 days would place the terminus in early January, long past. Dr. Harrow decided that Mrs. Marsh's timeline was likely inaccurate or invented. He returned to his observations of Timothy with renewed focus, determined to find a natural explanation before superstition filled the void where knowledge should be. On April 18th, Dr. Harrow was summoned urgently to Timothy's room. The boy had requested to speak with him privately, without the presence of nurses or Father Donovan. Dr. Harrow dismissed the attending staff and sat beside Timothy's bed. The boy had been in the hospital for nearly 3 months. He weighed 68 pounds. His eyes were now almost entirely gray. His hair was white. He looked ancient and young simultaneously. "I need to tell you the truth," Timothy said, "before it is too late for truth to matter." Dr. Harrow took out his journal and prepared to record whatever the boy would say. Timothy spoke steadily, without emotion. He stated that he had lied about when he stopped eating. It had not been in late November, as his father believed. It had been earlier, in October. Specifically, on October 7th, 1866. On that day, Timothy had been playing near the docks where his father worked. He had been climbing on stacked lumber when he fell, striking his head on a wooden beam. He had been unconscious for several minutes. When he woke, a crowd had gathered. His father had carried him home. A doctor had examined him and found no serious injury, only a bruise and mild concussion. The boy had been instructed to rest. But Timothy stated that something had happened during those minutes of unconsciousness. He had not merely been unconscious, he had been dead, or very nearly so. And in that space between life and death, something had found him. He described it as a presence, not a person. It had no form but had weight. It had no voice but had communicated. It had told him or made him understand that he had been selected, that his body would be used for a purpose, that he must not eat, must not drink, must not sustain himself in the ordinary way, that he would be preserved by other means, that in exchange he would be allowed to witness something. "Witness what?" Dr. Harrow asked. "I do not know yet," Timothy said. "But it is coming. I can feel it approaching, like footsteps in a distant room." The boy explained that he had tried to resist. In the first days, he had attempted to eat, but food made him violently ill. He had hidden his condition from his parents as long as possible, pretending to eat while disposing of food. But eventually, his appearance betrayed him. His parents had grown alarmed. The charade could not be sustained. He had continued the deception even in the hospital, not by eating secretly, but by lying about when the fast had begun. If his father believed it had started in late November, then observers would expect Timothy to survive for a certain period and then expire. But the true timeline was different. October 7th to April 18th was more than 6 months, and Timothy believed, or the presence inside him believed, that the endpoint was approaching. "When?" Dr. Harrow asked. "Soon," Timothy said. "Perhaps days, perhaps hours. When it comes, I will know, and then I will see what I was meant to see." Dr. Harrow asked what would happen after Timothy saw whatever revelation awaited him. The boy was silent for a long moment before answering. "I do not think," he said, "that there will be an after." Dr. Harrow faced an impossible decision. If Timothy's confession was truthful, then the boy was not merely starving but was in the grip of some psychological or physiological process that defied categorization. If Mrs. Marsh's account was accurate, then Timothy was approaching the end of whatever transformation had overtaken him. And if both accounts were delusions, products of trauma, suggestion, or shared fantasy, then the boy was simply dying slowly, while those around him constructed narratives to explain the inexplicable. Dr. Harrow chose to maintain the observation. Timothy remained in his isolated room. The watch continued. But the atmosphere had changed. Nurses requested reassignment, claiming the boy's presence disturbed them. Father Donovan visited daily, performing prayers of protection and blessing. Joseph Caldwell, Timothy's father, sat beside his son's bed for hours, holding the boy's thin hand and weeping silently. Timothy himself remained calm. He read from books provided by the hospital library, books of poetry, history, and natural philosophy. He stood at his window, watching the street. He spoke rarely, and when he did, it was in that formal, archaic manner that made him sound far older than 13. On April 23rd, Timothy stopped drinking water. He stated that he no longer required it. Dr. Harrow observed this development with growing alarm. Complete abstention from fluids would cause death within days. But Timothy showed no signs of dehydration. His lips remained moist. His skin retained elasticity. His urine output, already minimal, ceased entirely. Yet he showed no indication of renal failure. On April 25th, Timothy began to experience what the attending nurse described as fits of attention. He would suddenly become rigid, his eyes fixed on something invisible, his breathing stopping for periods of 30 seconds or more. When these episodes passed, he would relax and resume normal function. When asked what he had seen, he replied, "It is getting closer. It is almost time." On April 27th, at approximately 3 in the afternoon, Timothy Caldwell sat up in bed and announced, "It is here." Dr. Harrow was summoned immediately. He found Timothy standing at the window, his face pressed against the glass, staring down at the street. The boy's eyes were wide. His hands were trembling. His lips moved as though counting or reciting something inaudible. "What do you see?" Dr. Harrow asked. "Everything," Timothy whispered. "I see everything, all of it, all the paths, all the endings, all the beginnings. It is showing me. It is so vast. There's no room for me inside it. I am being pushed out." Father Donovan arrived and attempted to pray, but Timothy waved him away with irritation. "Your prayers are too small," the boy said. "They cannot reach this. Nothing you have can reach this." For 2 hours, Timothy stood at the window, narrating what he saw in fragments that made no coherent sense. He spoke of cities that had not yet been built. He spoke of wars that had not yet been fought. He spoke of machines that did not exist. He spoke of the sun expanding and the earth freezing, and humanity scattered among stars. He spoke of his own death in multiple futures, drowning, burning, withering, transformed. He spoke until his voice gave out, and then he continued to mouth words silently. At 5:17 in the evening, Timothy Caldwell collapsed. Dr. Harrow caught him before he struck the floor. The boy's body was cold and rigid. His pulse was undetectable. His breathing had ceased. For all observable purposes, he was dead. And then, at 5:19, he drew a breath. His eyes opened. He looked at Dr. Harrow with an expression of profound sadness and said, "It lied. There was nothing to see. only emptiness, only the nothing that comes after. He died at 5:20. This time, there was no return. Part 7. The Autopsy and the Questions. The autopsy of Timothy Caldwell was performed the following day by Dr. Samuel Pierce in the presence of Dr. Harrow and 2 additional physicians. The findings were documented in meticulous detail and filed with the hospital's medical records, where they remain archived to this day. Timothy's body weighed 64 pounds at death. His organs showed signs of atrophy, consistent with prolonged starvation, but not to the degree expected from 6 months of near-total fasting. His heart was small, but structurally normal. His lungs were clear. His digestive system showed no evidence of recent food consumption. The stomach and intestines were empty and contracted. The liver was reduced in size but functional at the time of death. The most unusual finding was in the brain. Dr. Pierce noted abnormal calcification in several regions, deposits of mineral matter that had no clear pathological origin. Similar deposits were found in the boy's pineal gland, a structure whose function was poorly understood, but which some anatomists had speculated might be related to consciousness or perception. The deposits were symmetrical and crystalline in structure, as though they had formed according to some organizing principle rather than as random pathological accumulation. Dr. Pierce concluded that Timothy had died of cardiac arrest, precipitated by extreme malnutrition, complicated by an unknown neurological condition that had caused the physical changes observed during his hospitalization. He could not explain the calcifications. He could not explain how the boy had survived as long as he had. The autopsy answered some questions and created others. Father Donovan performed last rites posthumously and arranged for Timothy's burial in St. Ignatius Cemetery. Joseph Caldwell, broken by grief and confusion, attended the service along with a small group of hospital staff and curious observers. The boy was interred in a simple pine coffin on May 1st, 1867. His headstone bore only his name, his dates of birth and death, and a line from Scripture chosen by his father. For now we see through a glass, darkly. Dr. Harrow published a complete account of the case in the American Journal of Medical Science in June of 1867. The article generated considerable controversy. Some physicians argued that Dr. Harrow had been deceived by a clever fraud. Others suggested that Timothy had suffered from a rare metabolic disorder that mimicked starvation resistance. Still others proposed that the case represented a new category of disease, a condition affecting both body and mind in ways that produced symptoms resembling but not identical to known pathologies. None of these explanations satisfied Dr. Harrow. In his private journal, discovered after his death in 1892, he wrote, "I observed Timothy Caldwell for 97 days. I measured, tested, and documented every aspect of his decline. But I do not believe I understood what I was observing. I do not believe I was equipped to understand. There are states of being that exist outside the taxonomies of medicine, outside the categories of disease and health. Timothy entered such a state. What he found there, what found him, I cannot say. But I know that he was changed. And I know that when the change was complete, there was nothing left of the boy I had first examined, only a vessel, emptied of self, waiting to be filled with something that never came, or came and found nothing worth keeping." In the years following Timothy Caldwell's death, Dr. Harrow compiled accounts of similar cases from medical literature and correspondence with colleagues. He identified 7 documented instances of individuals, primarily children or adolescents, who had survived extended periods without food while undergoing physical transformations. The earliest account dated to 1793. The most recent, aside from Timothy, occurred in 1864. All shared common features: a precipitating trauma or illness, cessation of eating and drinking, gradual physical changes affecting appearance and behavior, and death occurring within 6 months of the fast's commencement. In several cases, the subjects had spoken of waiting for something, or of being shown something, or of becoming something other than human. In all cases, the medical community had been unable to explain what had occurred. Dr. Harrow theorized, though he never published this theory, that these individuals had experienced a form of consciousness alteration so profound that it disrupted the normal relationship between mind and body, that they had somehow accessed states of perception incompatible with ordinary life, that their bodies, in attempting to accommodate these altered states, had begun to shut down non-essential functions, preserving only what was necessary to maintain awareness, and that when the alteration reached completion, when the self had been fully subsumed by whatever new mode of being they were approaching, death followed as a natural terminus. It was not possession, he believed. It was not disease in the conventional sense. It was transformation, a metamorphosis that human physiology could not survive. As though these individuals were attempting to become something else, and their bodies simply could not complete the process. Dr. Harrow's research remained unpublished. His colleagues considered his theories too speculative, too distant from empirical medicine. The journals containing his observations were archived after his death and forgotten. The case of Timothy Caldwell faded into obscurity. Mentioned occasionally in discussions of unusual medical phenomena, but rarely examined in detail. St. Ignatius Cemetery still exists, though much of it has been relocated due to urban development. Timothy Caldwell's grave was moved in 1912 to a newer section of the cemetery, where it sits beneath a maple tree marked by the same simple stone that Joseph Caldwell commissioned. Few visitors find it. Fewer still know the story behind the name, but the story persists in fragmentary form in archived medical journals, in hospital records, in the scattered correspondence of physicians who witnessed something they could not explain. It persists in the accounts of Mrs. Abigail Marsh and others like her, parents who lost children to transformations that medicine could not categorize and faith could not interpret. What Timothy Caldwell saw in those final hours, if he saw anything at all, remains unknowable. He spoke of vastness, of futures stacked like images in glass, of a nothing that waited at the end of perception. But whether these were genuine visions or the hallucinations of a dying brain cannot be determined. Whether the presence he described was real or imagined, malevolent or indifferent, cannot be proven. What is known is this: a boy stopped eating and did not die for 6 months. His body changed in ways that defied normal physiology. He claimed to be waiting for something that would reveal itself at the appointed time. And when that time came, if it came, he saw either everything or nothing. And the distinction ceased to matter, and he died with the knowledge that whatever he had endured, whatever had been done to him or through him, had been for no purpose that he could name or understand. Perhaps that is the most disturbing element of the case, not the transformation itself, but its apparent meaninglessness. Timothy had been promised revelation. He had been prepared through months of suffering. He had been emptied of everything ordinary food, comfort, identity itself, so that he might be filled with something extraordinary. And in the end, there was only emptiness, only the recognition that he had been used for a purpose that was never explained, by something that never revealed itself, for reasons that died with him. The doctors and priests who attended Timothy believed they were witnessing either miracle or pathology. They searched for explanations in scripture or science. But perhaps what they witnessed was neither. Perhaps it was simply the universe selecting, at random, a vessel for some process it required, using that vessel until it broke, and then moving on without acknowledgement or memory. The boy who fooled doctors and priests fooled them not through deception, but through the terrible simplicity of his truth, that he was changing, that he did not know why, that something was using him, and that when it was finished, he would be discarded. He said this repeatedly, in various forms, throughout his hospitalization, but no one believed him, because belief would have required accepting that human life could be so arbitrary, so instrumental, so utterly without inherent meaning. And so they measured and prayed and theorized, and Timothy waited, growing lighter and stranger, until the thing that had claimed him finished its unknowable work and let him go. Thus concluded the documented observation of Timothy Caldwell, a case that posed the question whether the human body could be commandeered by forces that medicine could not identify and theology could not explain, and answered it in the affirmative. Though the nature of those forces, their origin, and their purpose remained as opaque as the empty eyes of the boy who died trying to see what they had promised to show him, and saw nothing, and knew, finally, that there had never been anything to see at all.